You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. In this week's episode, we have part 2 of my interview with Garry Dallas, where we talk about his trip to Bell Island, Newfoundland, on the east coast of Canada. As you'll soon hear, Garry was hosted by Rick Debbie and the team at Ocean Quest Adventures. Bell Island sounds absolutely amazing with World War II wrecks, icebergs, humpback whales, orca, and the Bell Island mine, all in one of the most pristine environments on Earth. If you want to find out more, I've included a link to Ocean Quest Adventures in the podcast notes. Also in this episode, Garry and I discussed the Scuba Force SF2 Sidemount Rebreather. All this and much more in this episode of Speaking Sidemount. We know you're a cave explorer. Have you got some exploration projects that you're working on at the moment?
So far, I've been teaching too much over the last couple of years, but I've got a nice little cave to do in Spain. I've been asked to go out to Papua New Guinea as well. Logistics and time and sorting all these bits and pieces out need to be done when that comes about. It's nice for people to see what's going on. Don't particularly like talking about myself too much, but for people to be interested in the adventures that you can get, and without being egotistical, it's supposed to be something that you enjoy and you are passionate about, and that's what the explorers are there. That's what they do. They're passionate about it. It's a way of life. It's not a speciality, but it is often thought about like that, unfortunately. So if we can get people's mindsets to understand what you are actually meant to be doing and learn it and experience it and dive it and keep diving and keep diving. So that's the only way you get experience, not through reading books so much. That's nice background, but being in that environment is where people learn.
Yeah, and I think it enables you to keep growing as well personally. It's one thing Steve Bogart's emphasized when I interviewed him is he's always learning. The dives he does now weren't the dives he was doing 20 years ago. And so it's important for each of us to also be expanding our diving. And yeah, I mean, I saw you in Newfoundland earlier this year too. That looked amazing.
Oh.
Come on, you spill the beans, man. Tell us a bit about it.
Oh, Newfoundland. What can I say? There's lots of places in the world that I haven't struck off my bucket list yet, but I like my wrecks. I like every element of diving, but the wrecks, I need them to be historically saturated and make it worth my interest to dive them. And I was absolutely fortunate enough. I'm not going to go into how I actually got the trip last year, but it was an amazing experience with a bunch of guys that just couldn't do enough for you. Ocean Quest Adventures are amazing in the sense that they have absolutely got it all sewn up. And for the experience that I had, I didn't bust a gut. I didn't break a sweat. It was fantastic. Yeah. Colder water, yeah, sure. But with the colder water, you get other things like better visibility. And you've got these wrecks that have been sat there since World War II. That the history on Bell Island and Conception Bay around the wrecks is quite interesting and funny at the same time. But for a 120-metre long wreck to be sitting there, bolt upright in the water, and you've probably seen one or two of the pictures. It's absolutely, you could spend a year on those wrecks and still not even scratch the surface. It's so nice. So yeah, I've got some more trips going back there for next year again.
I've got to add that to my list. I was in truck for the first time this year and I got exactly the same experience, being able to dive some of those wrecks and the difference between diving something that has a massive amount of history behind it and learning about that, and then diving the wreck and starting to understand it. I'm like you, I love wreck dive. Every ship is a little different. Every ship has a story to tell.
The only thing you don't get, though, with the wrecks in truck is an iceberg floating past. Or a humpback and his calf.
Sure.
And the other thing that Conception Bay has got is the Bell Island mine.
Yes.
There's a huge mine over there that definitely needs exploring.
Did you dive it, or?
Oh, yeah. Jill Hyneth and a few of the other buddies at the time, we all dived it. And it was a fantastic mine. It's probably one of the biggest, and it goes underneath the seafloor. So you're still in fresh water, underneath the ocean. It cuts down to something like, I don't know, 600-700 meters or something. But it's all that's not being explored. It goes off in not just underneath, but sideways. There's so much of it to explore. It's unbelievable. There's so much artifacts that were still there from the day before they flooded the mine. There's an awful lot to be seen there. So you've got four things really in one place. Mm-hmm. And you've got your mines, you've got your humpbacks, the orcas, you've got icebergs. I mean, anybody who's dived an iceberg who can sit next to one and just look at it and go, wow, it's unbelievable. Yeah. And then you've got all the wrecks as well, and they're fantastic.
So a playground for divers of all ilks.
Yeah.
Recently, I saw a post that you've been doing some work on Sidemount rebreathers and the SF2. What can you share with us about your experience with that so far?
I've been looking at the SF2 for, ever since it came out, some 6 years ago or something. And it looked like a nice piece of equipment. And I wanted to see what was happening, develop my own experience on the rebreathers as well. I've dived on the Sentinel, the JJ, a couple of others as well that were in the making. But the SF2 pretty much been around for that length of time. And the opportunity came up to actually do a course on it. So I thought, hey, why not? And to dive it in side mount as well as back mount, which is not many of those rebreathers can do that. So I dived it on both over the course of the time I was there. And I enjoyed it in back mount. It was extremely light, but yet not light in the water. So because most of it is not hollow and sealed, it doesn't create a lot of buoyancy. So that was one of the nice things about it. So for me, having anything on my back, that's definitely a consideration.
Yes.
But then to dive it on your side and it almost being neutral in the water, it's a very nice piece of kit. And, you've got the guys that dive it in wetsuits, and they've got their configuration in the wetsuit. And it can be dived in different configurations, whether it be on your right-hand side, on your left, or like a stage. But one of the things I wanted to do for the dry suit cold water divers was to make the unit just literally bolt on to our existing side mount setup.
Sure.
And that would be a more lucrative proposition for a side mount diver, open circuit, to turn to a rebreather. But we've got a couple of things that we have to work against. Powers that be stipulate that you must have an independent source of bailout and diluent. So I thought about it. I've been talking to Matt about what criteria we had to work with, size of cylinders, etc., what was the minimum requirements. And then I phoned him up one day and said, I've just come up with the idea. Mm-hmm. So he said, tell me all about it. So we met up at Stony Cove and I showed him. It was a simple idea, but that's partly why I called my company Simply Sidemount and Simply Tech, because we just don't need anything complicated. The more simple and outside the box you look at it, rather than being stuck in the middle of a whole load of things that you've got to work with, becomes more simple, I suppose. So I just came up with a simple idea, something that's readily available, and it worked. So I've tried in the wetsuit configuration, I've tried it in dry suit configuration, and with steels and alleys. It's lovely.
Yeah, and one of the considerations people talk about when looking at side mount rebreathers is, static lung load and work of breathing in different orientations. How does it perform?
Well, yeah, for those people that know, I tend to dive in a breathable flat trim. It works lovely. Rebreathers are often tested by people who are experienced, very well known in their discipline, but don't always hover in such a horizontal attitude.
Yes.
And as a result, the rebreather can then be made to suit that particular diver. And it'll work. When you get that rebreather onto somebody that can hover, and maybe it doesn't work quite so well. Mm-hmm. The work of breathing's got to work right, and functionality, and it all has to work. And the thing I like about the SF2 the most is the way it dumps the gas out of the loop when it overexpands. And that puts the diver comfortably in that horizontal trim that allows it to escape rather easily. And also as a result, the work of breathing is nice because it's all at the same level as the diver's chest. So I deliberately test things just for the hell of it. And one of the things I did was I sat completely still in the water, hovered in horizontal trim. My dump valve on my dry suit works perfectly, so it just dumps as I don't have to move. It just dumps as I ascend. So did the rebreather. And I didn't
Wow.
have to move the muscle. And I watched the open circuit divers, and we just went down to 30 meters and dropped down, came back up again, and I didn't move for the entire dive.
Awesome.
And it was lovely. It just shows that a unit can be made to work that nicely. Of course, it does need to work in other situations as well. So
Yep.
it has to work in a head up or a head down position. You can shut off ADVs and you can shut off your injection of gas, and that helps. Just like on other units, you still have to, if you're going to go head down, you have to shut an ADV off. Otherwise, it just starts letting gas in and you get more buoyant.
What about on your side orientation? Let's say going through a door in a wreck or something like that where you need to turn on your side.
I've dived it where I was upside down.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on my side, and somebody videoed me going past something that I think it was in Bobster, on it. And yeah, I just went on my back and went on my front side, tipped forward, tipped backwards.
Yep.
Some orientations do give you a little bit more hard work, but you're never going to get that absolute perfect scenario.
Sure.
So you know, if you're going to dive like that, which nobody does, then it's not too much of a problem unless you were going into a situation, for example, into a cave or down in the hold of a wreck and you had to go vertically down. But then you'll understand your equipment, you know how it works, and you'll dive it accordingly.
Yeah, you work it in that environment. Yep, understood.
There's no perfect thing that works everywhere. One day there will be. It'll look like one of those James Bond things that you stick in your gob and you know, it does everything and it lasts for hours.
Yeah. The future is coming, I think. I mean, one thing I spoke to Steve about was diving side mount rebreather with instead of having bailout, you've got a redundant side mount rebreather. So, and he kind of saw that as the future. You're moving to a technological solution to a diving problem. And in the past, I think we've been afraid of the technology and it has caused problems for sure. But everything's improving. And I think the exciting thing at Sidemount is we're now seeing people like Steve and yourself and others work with the manufacturers and work with the systems to evolve them into something that's going to be really diveable. So I'm excited to hear more about that.
That's important, that a manufacturer can work with the diver. If they want to improve their unit, fundamentally sell more products, they have to work with the divers that dive it. They've got their own team, but in different environments and not from a subjective point of view as well. It needs to work for the rest of us. And in fact, you're going to teach people, so it's got to be taught. It has to be relatively easy to teach it and relatively easy to dive it from the word go. Otherwise, they're going to give up right from the start.
There's a lot of rebreather divers here in New Zealand and a lot of very good rebreather divers and instructors. And as I was discussing this with them, it was, you know, the interesting thing was, well, you know, why don't you go to a back mount rebreather? Why are you going side mount? And like you, that's abhorrent to me. So it was, you know, for me, if I'm going to go rebreather, it's going to be side mount. And a few of them have dived side mount, but understanding the feeling of freedom and simplicity that you can build in a side mount system is really key to that. Perhaps later on we can get you back as you've developed that further and we can share some more. Probably just about out of time. One thing I guess I'd like to ask in closing is what advice do you wish someone had given you when you started side mount diving?
Get some good training. Go with somebody that really dives it, breathes it. For me, it was more progression, which I took on board, and it's developed itself all the way through everything that I do. I did a rebreather course on the JJ a few years ago on Trimix, and I dived everything on side mount because it has to work for every single type of configuration or mode of transport that you decide to use. I love the fact that it goes with the twin set very well. It feels very nice and very stable, and it's accessible. It could always be dived wrong. Always be dived wrong. And for me, as a very inquisitive and challenge-loving person, I found that the whole concept of side mount was just growing because everything that we did was just a new, tangible experience. I wanted to prove that it could work. And yes, we've had to make a lot of changes to things over the years, but that you don't know as a new, inexperienced side mount diver. So grab yourself a good one and go and learn everything you can learn off them. Awesome.
Mate, it's been emotional. It's been excuse me. It's been a great, I'm choking up at the end of the interview. Thanks very much. Great to meet you. I mean, I don't know if you've known of me, but I've known of you for some time. And
yeah, I've seen you about, Steve.
Yeah, and we have similar roots back to Tom Steiner and Malt in some ways. So it's kind of
yeah.
To catch up. We have to catch up and dive sometime. So I don't know if I can drag you down to New Zealand or I have to come north, or we meet in the middle. But
I've been invited at least a dozen times now by different people. I'm sure I must be able to make it.
You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.